All right, I'd like to call to order the Planning and Zoning Commission meeting for October 2nd, 2024. Roll call.
Arel.
Here.
Budke.
Here.
Kleva.
Here.
Kuhn.
Here.
Lunsky.
Here.
Mattson.
Here.
Reichert.
Here.
Sandy.
Here.
Wasvik.
Here.
All present. We have a quorum.
All right, reading and approval of the minutes from the September 4th meeting. Mr. Reichert.
Move approval.
Moved by Mr. Reichert, second by Mr. Budke. Any further discussion on the minutes? Not seeing any. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, same sign. All right, meeting minutes are approved as submitted. Item 3, public hearings, final approvals. We have nothing. Item 4, communications and preliminary approvals. 4-1.
4-1, vacation of portion of Career Drive and adjacent northern parallel utility easement located at 1215 North 42nd Street.
Ms. Grasser.
Good evening. So tonight I'll talk to you through the vacation and replat of Airport 7. They're looking, I'll start with the vacation. They're looking at vacating the right-of-way in this hatched mark here, and then also the utility easement that's just to the north of it, a 10-foot, and they will be rededicating that in the plat. So they're looking to vacate this to correlate with the replat. They're straightening out Career Drive to make a 90-degree turn in there, just to better sight lines, a little bit safer, since they'll expect lots of traffic on that. So this highlights the vacating right-of-way, and this one highlights the vacation of the easement that will be dedicated in the replat.
All right, Mr. Budke.
I'd like to just request recusal on this one, this 4-1 and 4-2. My employer is the architect of record on this project.
Mr. Reichert.
So moved.
All right. Second. All right, anybody, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Mr. Budke being recused.
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Mr. Budke, you are recused. Thank you. If we need to call on you for questions, you could answer them at that. All right. So we got 4-2 or 4-1.
Yes. So this is the replat. Here it just shows the straightening out of Career Drive. You can see it's at a 90-degree now. The utility easement will be along this north and south side of Career Drive with a 10-foot. And so with that rededication, this lot does get a tish bigger, and the Grand Forks Public Schools owns these lots and is in the works with figuring out the price of that and how that shrinks theirs and makes their lot bigger. So they are in the works of figuring that out, but we're on board and supportive of both of these vacations and replat.
Okay, 4-1. Mr. Reichert.
Are they doing this? I mean, does it sound like they have a tenant that wants to buy this or something to go there? Or are they just doing it to make it more desirable, do you know?
We're doing it to make it safer to get on and off of North 42nd Street. We have seen some things preliminarily for that lot, but nothing submitted for sure. It's changed a few times, but more for ease of the drivers. And that will be special assessed out to them.
Okay,
Thank you.
there's no public hearing, anything on this, so.
Move approval.
Moved by Mr. Reichert, second by Mr. Lunsky. Any further discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. 4-1 passes unanimously. 4-2.
Replat of Airport 7-3 subdivision located at 1215 North 42nd Street.
Ms. Grasser. We've already read it.
Yeah, move approval.
Moved by Mr. Reichert.
Second.
Second by Mr. Mattson. Any further discussion? Not seeing any. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, same sign. 4-2 passes unanimously. Reports from the Planning Department. 5-1.
Thank you. So tonight I'll be presenting to you a variance data collection analysis project that I've been working on for quite a while now, and some resulting proposed code changes from that. So first, to start the project, the purpose was to uncover which variances are granted the most by the Board of Adjustments and determine if code should be changed to reduce the variances requested and granted, and maybe see if we need to modernize our code a little bit. So the process itself started with me reading through the Board of Adjustments minutes starting January 1, 2013, all the way to the end of 2023. From there, I documented each variance, both granted and denied, and their deviations from our land development code. Then I analyzed the number of each variance type, the number of occurrences in each zoning district, and then found the average and median deviations from code. And finally, I have some proposed code changes. So, yes. The results of the analysis that were over a 10-year period, there were a total of 644 total variances entered with 6 denials. The top 3 most frequently granted variances were impervious surface area with 165, accessory building area with 152, and side yard setback with 69. So I want to stop here and just give a little bit of context about the Board of Adjustments. So some of their items get either pulled or tabled. So the ones that are tabled, they're seen by the board, tabled, and then brought back at successive meetings, tweaked a little bit, and they eventually do get passed. The pulled ones, if it's not seeming like it's really feasible, it's going to get passed by the board. A lot of times applicants will pull them. It was brought up at the Board of Adjustments, how is your project accounting for these instances? My response was, if they're tabled, like I said, usually they come back and get approved. So then in that case, they're entered as granted variances for my purposes. The pulled ones are not accounted for, mostly because no action was taken on them, so I did not put them in my data. Moving on. From there, I analyzed which zoning districts they occur in most and how much they deviate. And then finally, we decided to focus on accessory building area and side yard setback for code changes. So here are just some tables. I won't go through every single thing on here, but on the left you can see the counts of the various types of variances that I recorded. The top 5 are highlighted there. On the right you see the 3 tables of the variance types that I focused on in this presentation. You can see I break it down by zoning district, how many in each district, then the average amount that they vary by, the median, and the high and low. As you can see, every single one mostly occurring in those R1 and R2 districts. So impervious surface area, I'm not going to go through everything here. I just wanted to highlight that I did present this information to Board of Adjustments, and I talked to them about kind of the implications of increasing impervious surface area in our residential areas that already experience a lot of street flooding during rainfall events. Like I said, not pursuing a code change for this, but just really highlighted the impact of increasing impervious surface area over time, even if it's just a little bit at a time. So here I showed them some maps showing kind of the areas most impacted by certain rainfall events. And then next, accessory building area, like I said, mostly in the R1 and R2s. We did decide to explore a code change for this. The process for that, first I researched other cities' regulations on accessory building area. I then evaluated the lot sizes of properties with the variances granted. And finally, I tested the new proposed thresholds to see if a significant number of those variances granted would have been resolved. So for those who don't know or those who need a refresh, our current code regulations for accessory building area are that properties under 10,000 square feet in area are allowed up to 1,000 square feet in accessory building area, and lots over 10,000 or over are allowed up to 1,200 square feet. So like I said, first I researched other cities' regulations. We have Bismarck, their single and 2-family urban are allowed up to 1,200 square feet. Their single-family rural under 40,000 square feet are allowed up to 1,400. In Fargo, the single family is not to exceed the coverage of the principal building or 700 square feet, whichever is greater. And their single-family rural below 40,000 was 150% coverage of principal building. And finally, West Fargo, we have residential with 1,000 and rural residential with 1,600. I will point out the Fargo single-family was kind of interesting. It kind of varied from the other cities I looked at. I did look at many other cities besides these 3, just decided to highlight these. But yeah, kind of interesting compared to the other ones. Wanted to include it though since it's Fargo and it's pretty close to us. So next, I looked at the lot sizes of the properties that were granted accessory building area variances. So the first table here, we have the R1s. As you can see, there's a pretty big number in that 10,001 to 20,000 square feet lots. Then there's a pretty sharp drop off when you get to the 20,001 to 30,000 square feet. Below, we have the R2s. Most of those are captured in that under 10,000 square feet. So because of that, we chose to keep the thresholds at under 10,000 and 10,000 and above, as most of R1 is captured between that 10,000, 1 to 20, and then most of R2 is below 10,000. I bring this up because at one point we did ponder maybe adding another threshold, like maybe 10 to 20, 20 to 30, but considering this, we decided to stick with what we have. So our proposed code change is to increase the allowances by 200 square feet respectively. So that would mean under the new proposed code, properties under 10,000 square feet would be allowed up to 1,200 square feet of accessory building area, and lots of 10,000 square feet or greater would be allowed up to 1,400 square feet. These new regulations would have resulted 51 of the variances granted, or about 40% in residential areas. And of that, 54% of the variances granted for the lots under 10,000 square feet would have been resolved, and about 34% of those for those 10,000 plus. Just some additional basis and justification. This increase is incremental, and it better reflects other cities' regulations, as well as the increase in size of some residential lots we've seen. So the last variance type I'll talk about today are side yard setbacks. Again, mostly in R1 and R2. One specific thing I want to focus on in the side yard setbacks is what's called the 20% rule. So that reads, each lot shall have 2 side yards, one on each side of the principal building. The sum of the width of the 2 side yards shall not be less than 20% of the average width of the lot. This rule can be perceived as complicated and sometimes creates a barrier to fully maximizing larger lots. Additionally, many new PUDs and developments have requested simple flat 5-foot or 7-foot instead of including the 20%, just to simplify designs and maximize footprints. So here I have it illustrated. So focusing on the top row, we have side yard setback regulations with the 20% rule. So for the 60 and 70 feet wide lots, it does not impose additional side yard setback requirements because of math. But we get to the 80-foot wide lots, and now we have an additional 2 feet required, so a total of 16 feet with a minimum side of 7 feet. And this is a scenario in which they can meet the minimum one side, but not anymore. So the rest has to be made up on the other side. So we have a 7-foot and a 9-foot to total 16 instead of just 2 minimums on each side. Similarly, with a 90-foot wide lot requirement of 18 feet total, we have a 7-foot minimum on one side, 11 feet made up on the other. On the bottom row of illustrations, 60 and 70 feet remain the same, but the 80 and 90 just have the minimum 7 feet on both sides, not having to accommodate extra 2 and 4 feet because of that rule. So putting this rule into the context of a larger lot, let's say you have a detached single-family home in an R1 zone with a 170-foot wide lot. The standard R1 side yard setback regulation would require 2 10-foot side yards, but this 20% rule would add an additional 14 feet on top of that, not allowing for maximum utilization of this lot. So I have it illustrated up in the top right. You see the 10-foot minimum, and then the rest has to be made up on the other side, so that'd be 24 feet in this case for a total of 34 feet. On the bottom, you can see without the 20% rule, just a minimum 10-foot, 10-foot, without that extra 14 feet imposed. Finally, I have some of our recent PUDs that have come through and requested just simple side yard setbacks without that rule. We have Prairie Second with 5 foot, Grand Valley with 7, and Southern Estates again with 5 feet. So our proposed code change, if you haven't guessed already, is to remove the 20% rule and determine side yard setback requirements strictly by the existing side yard regulations in each zoning district's code. So for example, R1 minimums already exist as lots containing 60 feet or less in width need to have 6 feet on both sides, and lots having average width greater than 60, less than 100, need to have 7 feet on both sides, and those lots 100 feet and greater need 10 feet on both sides. These regulations already exist in our code, so we're proposing to only go by these and not include that 20% rule. So, summary, impervious surface area, accessory building area, and side yard setback variances were the top 3 granted over a period of 10 years by the Board of Adjustments. We're not proposing a code change for impervious surface area, but due to concerns regarding street flooding and storm sewer inadequacies, we did discuss the implications of increasing impervious area throughout the city with the Board of Adjustments. For the accessory building code change, we're proposing to increase allowances up to 1,200 feet and 1,400 feet respectively to better reflect other cities, as well as make just an incremental change. The side yard setback code change is to remove the 20% rule and only use those prescribed side yard requirements based on lot widths, as this rule is considered confusing and inconvenient for those with larger lots. The next steps would be to bring this back to you all next month, as well as City Council for approval. And just a couple of last things, I wanted to add that we did present this to Board of Adjustments on September 5th. They were generally supportive of the proposed code changes. We did have a discussion regarding the balance between wanting more separation between homes and being able to maximize lots with that proposed side yard setback change. And I also did send out this information and presentation to the Forks Builders Association, which got pushed out to all their members. Those who provided feedback voiced support because they like the increased flexibility and decreased red tape. This is a 5 item, so not voting on it today, wanted to bring it to you for your feedback and thoughts before we did so. So with that, I'll stand for any questions.
Anyone have any comments or questions? Go ahead, Mr. Budke, I'm waiting.
I think it's great. Good job.
Thanks.
I just question if if we're worried about the impervious soil, or impervious, then we're adding possible buildings. So we're kind of going against what we said, but,
Could I ask a follow-up on that?
yeah.
So I recall when that conversation happened, I think it was some months ago, with Mr. Grasser, the pervious versus impervious, and specifically gravel, right? Like gravel, I understand, is like a gravel paving, but also just sort of my own common sense would suggest surely a gravel alley or parking spot is better than like a concrete or asphalt one. Is there some space in the code potentially to differentiate?
We did not talk about gravel. In the terms of the stormwater and the runoff, the gravel still generates enough to kind of trigger the engineering review to consider it pervious.
Okay.
And so in theory, yes, it absorbs a little bit, but it still generates the runoff and the erosion and stuff like that we want to try to capture and corral and contain a
We've
little
had this
better.
come up before, and we've deemed gravel as being an impervious soil.
We have, and like we really only talk about gravel inside city limits in terms of industrial and like lay down yards and things like that. We have tried to push inside city limits to have everything paved mostly for aesthetic and to be able to control that runoff. Just because it's really hard to keep gravel from creeping.
Yep.
Kind of to address what you're saying, we did think about that also, considering how many impervious surface area variances come in and are granted, and a lot of times they come in together, right? So it'll be impervious and accessory building, so you can build your garage or whatever. And we did really make that a point to talk about at Board of Adjustments. We said, with potentially increasing the accessory building allowances, there's gonna be more impervious requests, and we kind of try to stress that, we really need to scrutinize these more since they will be coming in more frequently, and we don't necessarily want to see every single one granted.
Are you going to change it impervious? I mean, something's got to,
So the thought here was that you're not necessarily changing how big the actual like overall footprint with the garage and the accessory, right? Like we're having larger garages come in with smaller households. And so with the side yard setbacks, you're making the sandbox in which they can put a footprint in bigger if we remove that 20%, but they still have to abide by, and you're allowing them to have a bigger garage, but those increases in that flexibility, that either means your house area or your principal has to be reduced, which some are requesting that, and you still have to meet impervious.
so something's got to give. in
So
order
the
to make it
impervious
work.
is still our hard line in terms of trying to control that runoff. It's just we're trying to open the sandbox to give them enough flexibility. They can still choose to offset and have a larger side yard. It's just if they want to go wider on the lot to have a bigger backyard and shorter side yards, we're just messing with that sandbox a little bit in terms of how they can play within it.
Well, sounds good to me. That answered my question. Anyone else have a question? Thank you for the information. Good.
You'll see it again for the next 2 months.
We'll just have to vote it down, I guess. No, it's good. Agreed. All right, what do we got? Monthly update?
So for this month's update, For site plans, we've approved Red River Potatoes addition, a new AT&T tower, EERC expansion, Kingsview Twin Homes, and then CMS shop under review. Meetings, we have Board of Adjustments meeting tomorrow. Public comment opportunities, still the Safe Streets for All, as well as US Highway 2 and Airport Drive / County Road 5 intersection near Grand Forks. Comments due by October 9th. That's all for the update.
Okay. 5-3, who's taking that one?
So, still me.
We're keeping you busy today, Sierra.
Yeah. I'm not going to go through everything on here. We wrote kind of just quick notes for people to look at if you're interested at whatever session you want to look through. I'll just go through a couple highlights. So the first session, the North Dakota Housing Initiative, the State Commerce and Health and Human Services Department conducted a series of listening sessions with the steering committee to address housing issues. Some of the things that were presented in that presentation included encouraging housing studies, zoning code updates, building code reviews, modular home options, pre-approved building plans to speed up approval times, allowing for ADUs, and also identifying areas for future housing now. Then we also had a keynote on missing middle housing. So some highlights from that. They encouraged 3 to 6 plexes, parking requirement reductions, cottage courtyard environments, as well as modifications to International Residential Code, and conducting lot tests to see what you can actually build on a given lot. And then also encourage partnerships with AARP&D. We do have a few handouts on middle housing over there on that podium if anyone wants to look through that. The last one I'll talk about is the Planning Commissioner training. Talked about comprehensive plans, zoning, considerations for decision-making, ethics, ET areas, zoning enforcement, annexations, etc. We are looking at probably also another shorter agenda next month, so if anyone's interested in any of those topics, we could put together something for next meeting and kind of talk through something in more detail if you would want that, so just let us know, and that's all I have.
Okay, is there something we'd want P and Z to highlight on that? I know some of you guys went to the conference. I was sick, so I didn't make it. Mr. Butke?
I just had a couple of thoughts. The one that stood out to me as far as like potentially for next month is this, under the missing middle keynote you had on there, the conduct test lots and kind of 50 by 140 foot lot. I'm curious about that. I've not done that exercise. I'm curious what the result would be.
Yeah.
And then the other one that stood out to me, I guess this isn't so much for next time, but there's a note in there. This is on the first page, affordable housing financing sources, and Luann Street brought up as an example of affordable housing development, and then staff conveyed offsets. And I was very curious what that discussion was like.
Sure, and Megan was at that session as well. And thank you both, Commissioner Mattson and Commissioner Sandy, for joining us that day. So that discussion kind of revolved around Luann Street hitting, being smaller lots, fully maximizing the lot, coming in with lower specials. Specials are always very high, but because there were smaller lots and things like that, it was as best as we could get with specials. But it was a planning commission or planning conference, right? And so the discussion was, well, how did that go in terms of logistically, and how do you like that environment, and was it a good product? And staff conveyed some of the concerns we've been dealing with after Luann, in terms of they're all front-loaded, and so there's really no on-street parking because they're front-loaded with wider driveways. And the snow hauling we have to snow haul because there isn't any really berm space to store snow, particularly after a bad year we had a couple years ago. And so it was kind of conveyed that yes, we hit the 38-foot wide lots at single-family detached, but those came with ramifications that we didn't fully realize at the time. Many North Dakota communities still don't go below 50-foot lots. We'd push that boundary significantly with the 38-foots, and we certainly have, it's a balance of priorities. You got not cheaper, because housing is still expensive, but you had lower housing price points with lower specials, but the offsets that come with that, trying to recognize those and what's the better gain there. Is the better density and just getting that number of housing units in? And yes, it came with a little bit more pain in terms of parking and snow hauling, but are those offsets worth it? to get the increase in housing and stuff like that, and to get as many folks in at those lower price points as we can. And so it's all about balancing community needs and what you're able to accept in terms of tolerances and things like that.
And cost to the city. for
And cost to the
snowplow.
city and things like that. So kind of discussed that route, was a discussion, there were some good examples to kind of corral that in the future in terms of not, only allowing a single driveway width and having it kind of taper off, instead of the full. That's not market really desirable for the most part, but you, as a city, we could corral it so that you would get some on-street parking and things like that. But then again, you're going to the market where everybody wants the double wide driveway. So it's a balancing act. Luann was definitely a lesson learned in terms of if we get another 38-foot request, we're going to have some hard conversations into what those tolerances are and should be, and where we should pull maybe driveway lits back to kind of offset those things. So.
Mr. Mattson?
Yeah, I think what I took out of some of this is just more and more everything we see, this one session was on missing middle housing and everything. All we see is these houses with the 2-stall garage or the 3-stall garage or whatever coming in our communities. We're not building communities that have, the alleys behind, the accessory dwelling units. Like, we're not doing it. So what can be done to actually help allow those different types of housing to come in and not just be the same old cookie cutter again and again? Densifying some of that, so we're, capitalizing on our infrastructure and things that are in place. It's just good practice. So it was a very good day to be there. Learned a lot out of it. So.
Awesome. So is there anything we'd like them to touch on for next month, since our agenda looks short? We mentioned the Luann project and that housing. Is there?
I would be interested to see, like, I know we rejected an ADU here a few months ago. Is there anything we can do to explore those?
Something you guys put together, Ms. Edwardson? Okay.
Yeah.
Especially if we're going to make garages bigger.
Yeah.
And we've certainly gotten
All the
requests
Bucky's
for
wives.
shop houses and things like that, and ADUs, and we can certainly dust off that ADU presentation we did a couple months ago and see if there's any way we could tweak it or
Interact or something?
a national trend is pushing more and more towards like pre-approved building plans. And so like the national APA has put out pre-approved in terms of, you still have to go to your commissions and get these and agree to them or whatever, but they are stock building plans that are widely acceptable in terms of industry standards and things like that. And so a lot of the state conversation we had in the beginning was if North Dakota truly wants to push and get outside investors coming in, a lot of them are looking for that pre-approval and that easy, don't necessarily need to come and ask for a zoning change, because that's contingent on whether or not there's a lot of public feedback and a lot of NIMBYism. But can a commission or can a council take the initiative to do the hard work up front, locate the multifamily districts ahead of time, pre-approved plans so that they can come in, invest, pick the plan, build it, and go without a political action. And so that was a big push from the conference and some of those national different trends of do as much as you can to make it easy for somebody to invest and build.
I'm sorry, Andrew. So was that for single family or multifamily?
It was across the board, across nationwide, right? There's a housing issue. North Dakota certainly benefits that we're behind, but we're not behind that bad comparatively. But the pre-approved single-family plans, so that, if you have a standard lot width, here's what fits.
Does it also say this is the if you have this lot, this is the cheapest, this is the middle, this is the
I
more
haven't.
expensive?
We
Same
honestly,
with multifamily. I mean, it would be nice, even if we could share with our developers, look, this is the cheapest. National research tells us, don't listen to your architect. National research tells us this is the cheapest, to build.
and I think we do really well with single family, and I think our developers do really well with single family, and we do really well with big box commercial. That missing middle kind of hit at And what the state kind of hit out with that international residential code is that, and I haven't looked into the number of units that we've approved, but at a certain point, units 3 or more, we have code regulations that, and maybe Andrew knows a little bit better, that you have to build to the commercial code because it's a rental, because it's 3 units or more. The state as well as local jurisdictions have the ability to modify the international residential code and say, we will accept this code standard for up to 4 units. So 4 units can be built to the standard as we would have for a single-family home. And so that reduces your fire sprinkler, stuff like that, some of those different energy efficiency requirements with commercials. They're still safe, they're still built to an international code, but allowing them to fall under the residential code allows you to have much cheaper, I don't remember what they said at the conference, like 20 or 30% difference between like that 4 unit. And so most developers who are looking to do 2, 3, 4, there's financing things that go with that, but also it's the building. They're building to a commercial standard, which is a much more intense, higher cost than it truly needs to be. So encouraging communities to look at allowing higher units to fall under the residential code to be able to have that little bit cheaper building.
Is there a reason, I mean, it seems to me that we have single family, we have duplexes, and then we have 20, 30. I mean, there are no 4s, 6s, 8s.
We don't really have duplexes in the sense it's 2 units on a lot. We have single family, we have single family attached. There's still 1 unit on what, right? So they're not really duplexes. But I think I honestly think it's the nature of our market, and probably Jenny and Megan, or Mr. Rowell and Miss Sandy can speak to that a little bit better than I can, because if you build a single-family home, they can find somebody who wants it, right? It's not that we don't have folks willing to buy houses at all price points. We have it. If we could expand the housing type to the 2, the 3, the 4s, we would get folks in the workforce
Used to build all kinds of them, 4plexes,
Price points.
8plexes, 12s, and
into home
You
ownership,
don't see 'em
into
here.
building
You just
equity,
don't see 'em anymore.
into building that type of thing.
1s, 2s, and 20s.
you look behind Valley Dairy on 36, there's all a bunch of 4plexes and stuff.
Yeah, I was just wondering if there's a reason for that.
Yeah, wasn't there something at the state level that we needed to get the whole state? I'm trying to remember what was talked about there, that to do the
There's-
4s or more.
They're encouraging the 2 to 4 more now, but I couldn't tell you why in the past 15 years we've really only seen single family and big.
I thought it was something with the commercial.
It's definitely with the international there's also like at a certain unit, and Andrew, like the single stair requirement, right? With architecture and things like that, if you have a certain number of units, you have to have multiple stairwells and life safety and things like that. Minnesota has gone to a single stair for a certain amount of units, which just, it's still safe and it's still possible. It just is, it's a cheaper way to do it. We have maybe,
It's like Miss Collins has her hand up, uh-oh.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
I think I unmuted myself. I think, Andrea, what you're getting at, you're there and you must like this. Quite a few years ago, probably 12 or almost 20 years ago, the International Building Code, which is for units, 2 buildings and above, 3 units for 30,000 units in a unit, right? You have to have a fire sprinkler system. So that adds an incredible amount of cost to a 3-plex, 4-plex, 8-plex. So that's a big part of it, I think. And so we stopped seeing them. We just don't see 4-plexes.
I think the state, to Bev's point, is getting more, and local jurisdictions and nationwide are recognizing that at that 3 and 4 scale, a fire suppression, as long as there's 1 hour, 2 hour separations between the units, the full-blown fire suppression isn't required. When you get to the higher units, the 6, the 7s, the 8s, yes, a fire suppression is needed because it's life safety and you need to get them out of the building and things like that. But I think maybe we went a little bit too far with safety in terms of the fire suppression, and they're recognizing that if you use other ways to do that, it's much cheaper. So
When you do a 4, typically, are you doing 2 next to each other with 2 on top? Or, because I mean, if you did them all on the same level, what do you need fire suppression for? You're just right at, I mean, you don't even need to get out.
It depends on how creative, how big of a lot you have, how you want to design it. I
I'm just
mean,
wondering if there's this, what they're seeing more and more.
Used to see two in front, two in back. I've seen that a
Yeah.
lot. We did a lot of those in South Dakota
Okay.
for a developer.
Well, that would be very interesting to me. And we would have the power to get rid of sprinkler systems in those?
it would be through, so the Planning and Zoning Commission doesn't approve the building codes. That goes through.
But I mean, we as a
council.
city could do that.
We could modify the residential code to allow up to 4 units. You can fall under the international residential code versus the commercial. You can amend those codes as a city. We do it in certain areas. And Bev knows that better than I do, because she's done those amendments for a number of years. But the cities can tailor the international business code, the international residential code, to their own specifications.
I'd really like to have a presentation on something like that.
Okay.
If we can make it easier and cheaper to build some multifamily stuff, I think that'd be great.
And what size lots do we need to put
Right.
fourplexes on, or whatever you want to call them? And
People are gonna not turn their nose up as much to a fourplex as they would a 40plex.
Oh, right, yeah.
A bunch of fourplexes compared to a 40, 20plex, 30plex, 60, 80plex, what we're having going on now, you know? People would be more apt
We
to.
look at that little 12plex across from Phoenix, right on Fourth and Belmont there. I mean, that's not taking up a lot of area, and you're putting a lot of density in there. I don't know why you'd need even in that, I don't know if you'd need or sprinkler system, but.
It depends on how they're separated.
There, you got some ideas from us.
Steve?
Yeah, Mr.
Could I
Buckley,
add
sorry.
just one more comment? So, we've talked a lot about like X number of plexes, right, in a single building, but just a bit of nuance here, like, I think some of the idea behind the missing middle as a term is not just like a magic number, but like different forms, or like formats of housing that have just sort of been lost to time, right, in the last like 50, 60 years, something like that. Types of buildings that used to be built and just aren't right now. So I think it's just a little bit added nuance there. And then, if I may, since we've got extra time, book club. I've got, so I recently finished reading a book that talks a lot about this and sort of grapples with this, call it dichotomy, that exists in our housing market right now. On the one hand, housing is like, it's necessary, it's shelter, it's where we dwell. And on the other hand, housing is also like an integral part of the macroeconomy and an investment vehicle, the price of which cannot go down. If it ever does, it's a problem for other reasons, right? And so there is this central tension to our housing market right now across the entire nation. The book that I read, give me just a moment, Escaping the Housing Trap, right? That's the description from this author is a housing trap, these two things. It does not offer like any sort of silver bullet solutions, but if I could sort of summarize a thesis, it really advocates for experimentation at the local level and trying to find solutions that work for the communities, and a lot of solutions that are incremental, which I think probably better describes some of those solutions from the past, right? Like different housing formats. So again, not looking for big greenfield fixes to add to the housing supply, but like look where there's opportunity in the existing fabric of the city, of the community, whether that's Fonzie's mother-in-law flat, right? Things like that, look for those and try and encourage those things. So, escaping the housing trap.
Very good, Mr. Budke. Anything else? I think we got our homework.
Move to adjourn.
Second? So moved. Meeting adjourned. Thank you.
Andrew, can you email